Love can ignite in the most unexpected places, even amidst the flames. In this heartfelt story, a retired firefighter recounts the tale of his first and only love, a forbidden romance born in the firehouse, tested by tragedy and eternalized in his heart. Grab a tissue, because this one will stay with you forever. The firehouse was James Morgan's second home. At just 25, he was a seasoned firefighter, known for his bravery and his captivating appearance. His fiery red hair and sculpted frame caught everyone's eye, but he remained humble, focused solely on his duty. His world, however, shifted the day Michael Carter walked in, a new recruit whose presence changed the air in the room. Michael was a towering figure with dark hair, a well-groomed beard, and a physique that looked carved from a stone. His quiet confidence and deep, steady voice were magnetic. As introductions were made, James found himself stealing glances, noticing the small details. Michael's firm handshake, the way his dark eyes seemed to hold unspoken stories. From the moment their gazes met, an unexplainable tension crackled between them. It was an uncharted feeling, something James had never experienced before. His heart raced in a way that had nothing to do with the adrenaline of a fire alarm. Could this be attraction to a man? James dismissed the thought, though the lingering warmth in his chest told him otherwise. Their first training session together only heightened this connection. As they practiced carrying each other through mock rescue scenarios, James felt the undeniable strength in Michael's arms and the brush of his body against his own. It was nothing inappropriate, yet it left James flustered in a way he couldn't explain. Later that night, James sat in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the day's events. Across the room, Michael was doing the same. Neither man spoke of what they felt, but the unspoken was growing louder with every passing second. For the first time in his life, James didn't know how to confront his emotions. Outside, rain began to fall, masking the turmoil within James's heart. He turned to glance at Michael one last time before sleep took him, only to find Michael already looking back. They both quickly averted their eyes, but the exchange lingered, a silent promise of something neither dared to name. As the storm raged outside, James couldn't help but wonder, was this connection a fleeting storm, or the start of something life-altering? The weeks that followed only deepened the bond between James and Michael. Their friendship grew naturally, but with an undercurrent of something more. They laughed easily, shared meals after shifts, and often found themselves seeking each other out during downtime. One particularly grueling day, the crew responded to a warehouse fire that tested their limits. Flames roared like a beast unleashed, and smoke filled the air, making every breath a struggle. James and Michael worked side by side, their movements instinctively in sync. It was as if they could read each other's minds. When the fire was finally extinguished, James found himself sitting on the back of the fire truck, his energy spent. Michael approached him, handing him a bottle of water. "You did good today," Michael said, his voice warm and steady. James nodded, his throat too dry to respond. As their eyes met, the world seemed to fade away. James felt a pang of longing, an ache he couldn't explain. Michael seemed to sense it too, his gaze softening in a way that made James's pulse quicken. The moment was fleeting, but it left James reeling. Back at the firehouse, James replayed the interaction in his mind. He had never questioned his sexuality before, but now he couldn't ignore the thoughts swirling in his head. Every smile, every touch, Every glance from Michael seemed to light a fire within him. Michael, too, was grappling with unfamiliar feelings. He had always seen himself as straight, yet James was different. His kindness, his strength, his quiet determination, it all drew Michael in, leaving him questioning everything he thought he knew about himself. Neither man spoke of their feelings, but the tension between them was becoming impossible to ignore. It was a fire neither could extinguish, and they were both afraid of getting burned. The firehouse was abuzz with energy as the crew prepared for a charity event, a fireman's ball to raise funds for local families affected by fires. James and Michael found themselves working late into the night, setting up tables and decorations. As they worked, their camaraderie was on full display. They teased each other, shared stories, and laughed in a way that felt effortless. Yet beneath the surface, their feelings were simmering, threatening to boil over. At one point, Michael accidentally knocked over a box of supplies. As he bent down to pick it up, James crouched to help, their faces mere inches apart. For a moment, neither moved. James could feel Michael's breath against his skin, his heart pounding in his chest. "Thanks," Michael murmured, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant. James nodded, his own voice failing him. The moment passed, but it left them both shaken. That night, James couldn't sleep. The memory of Michael's closeness haunted him, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Was this love, lust, or something entirely new? Michael was equally restless. For the first time in his life, he was questioning everything: his identity, his future, and what it would mean if he allowed himself to feel what his heart was screaming at him. The firehouse, once a place of camaraderie and routine, had become a pressure cooker of emotions. James and Michael were standing on the edge of a precipice, and it was only a matter of time before they would have to jump or walk away. The firehouse was unusually quiet that evening. The crew had just returned from a grueling day of drills, and most of the men were either asleep or winding down in their bunks. James sat alone in the common area, the glow of the fireplace casting shadows across his face. He nursed a mug of coffee, though his hands trembled more from nerves than exhaustion. Michael entered the room, his dark hair damp from a quick shower and his sharp features softened by the low light. James stiffened as their eyes met, but Michael's easy smile disarmed him. "Couldn't sleep either?" Michael asked, settling into the chair across from him. James shook his head. "Too much on my mind, I guess." Michael studied him for a moment, his usual confidence giving way to something more tentative. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice low but steady. "Anything bothering you?" James hesitated. The truth was clawing at his throat, begging to be let out, but the fear of rejection, of losing this bond, kept him silent. Instead, he deflected. "Just tired, that's all." Michael didn't press further, but his gaze lingered as if he could see the turmoil swirling inside James. After a moment, he leaned back and sighed. "You know, when I first started here, I wasn't sure I'd fit in. You guys seemed like a tight-knit group." James raised an eyebrow. "You fit in just fine. The crew loves you." Michael chuckled softly, a sound that sent a shiver down James's spine. "I wasn't worried about the crew," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes flicked to James, and for the first time, there was no mistaking the meaning behind his words. The room seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with unspoken truths. James's heart pounded as he struggled to find his voice. "Michael, He trailed off, unsure how to continue. Michael leaned forward, his expression both vulnerable and determined. James, I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't ignore it anymore. Can you? James felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. For weeks he had buried his feelings, convincing himself they were one-sided. But now, faced with Michael's raw honesty, the dam broke. No, he admitted, his voice trembling. I can't. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their confession hanging in the air. Then, without warning, the fire alarm blared, shattering the moment and sending them both into action. Whatever had begun to unfold between them would have to wait. The fire was one of the worst they had faced. A towering inferno consuming an apartment building with residents still trapped inside. James and Michael worked side by side, their movements seamless as they pulled people from the flames. Adrenaline coursed through their veins, pushing aside everything but the mission at hand. As the hours wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. James was on the third floor when a beam collapsed, pinning him beneath it. Pain shot through his leg as smoke filled his lungs. He struggled to stay conscious, the world around him blurring. James! Michael's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and desperate. Moments later, Michael was by his side, his hands frantically working to free him. Stay with me, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I'm not leaving you. Through the haze of pain, James managed a weak smile. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Michael finally freed him and carried him down to safety, his arms trembling under the weight, but his resolve unshaken. Outside, as paramedics rushed to tend to James, Michael knelt beside him, his face etched with worry. Don't you dare leave me, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. James reached up, his fingers brushing against Michael's cheek. I'm not going anywhere. In that moment, the unspoken feelings between them became undeniable. Michael leaned down, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and urgent, a promise forged in the fire of their shared ordeal. It was a kiss that spoke of fear, relief, and a love neither of them had dared to name. James spent weeks in the hospital, recovering from his injuries. Michael was there every day, his presence a constant source of comfort. They spoke openly now, their bond deepening with each passing moment. Michael confessed his fears, his confusion, and the joy he felt when he was with James. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. James, too, found solace in their conversations. He shared parts of himself he had never revealed to anyone, his walls crumbling under Michael's unwavering gaze. They laughed, they cried, and they planned a future together, a future that seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. One evening, as Michael helped James take his first steps after surgery, their connection grew even stronger. Michael's hand steadied him, but it was his words that gave James the strength to keep going. You've always been the strong one, Michael said softly. Now it's my turn to be strong for you. James smiled through the pain. We'll be strong together. It was in those quiet moments that their love truly flourished. They were no longer just friends or colleagues. They were partners in every sense of the word. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they faced it together, ready to fight for the happiness they had found. The firehouse welcomed James back with open arms once he was strong enough to return to work. He was still recovering, moving a little slower than before, but his resolve to return to duty was unwavering. Michael had been his rock during those months of healing. Now, as James stood once more among his brothers in uniform, he felt a new kind of pride, not just for the work they did, but for the man who had stood by him. Michael, ever the steady presence, kept an eye on James during his first shift back. They worked as a team, their rhythm now more natural than ever. During a quiet moment in the locker room, Michael leaned against a row of lockers watching James adjust his gear. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. James turned to him with a small smile. "I'm ready. I have you to thank for that." Michael's expression softened, but there was something more in his eyes. A hesitation, a vulnerability he rarely showed. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me around after everything." James frowned, stepping closer. "Why would you think that?" Michael shrugged, his gaze dropping. "I don't know. Maybe I thought you'd change your mind about us." James reached out, his hand brushing against Michael's. "Michael, if there's one thing I'm certain of, it's you. We've been through hell together, and you never left my side. I'm not about to let you go now." Michael looked up, his eyes meeting James's. The tension in the room was palpable, but it wasn't the kind of tension that came from uncertainty. It was the kind that came from two people who had finally found something worth holding on to. They couldn't linger long as duty called, but the quiet exchange left them both feeling lighter. That night, as they sat together on the firehouse roof watching the city lights, they talked about their plans, of finding a place of their own, of living openly one day, even if the world wasn't ready for them yet. It was a dream, but it was their dream, and for the first time, it felt possible. The months that followed were a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered promises. James and Michael had mastered the art of secrecy, but it was becoming harder to hide their feelings. Their co-workers, though loyal and close-knit, lived in a time when love like theirs wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. One evening, Michael surprised James with a small picnic on the outskirts of the city. They sat on a blanket under the stars, their laughter mingling with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. It was one of the few places they felt safe enough to let their guard down. "I've been thinking," Michael began, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "About us. About what's next." James looked at him, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" Michael reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, weathered box. Inside was a simple silver ring. "I know we can't make this official, not yet, but I want you to know how serious I am about this. About you." James stared at the ring, his breath catching in his throat. "Michael, He swallowed hard, overwhelmed by emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever find someone who made me feel this way." "Yes. 1,000 times, yes." Michael slipped the ring onto James's finger, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't much. It wasn't a grand ceremony or a declaration to the world, but in that moment, it was everything. They had each other, and that was enough. The firehouse had always been a place of camaraderie, where everyone was family. But recently, the air had shifted. The usual laughter and banter seemed tinged with something darker. Whispers in corners, sideways glances, and hushed conversations that stopped when James or Michael entered the room. James was the first to notice it. One morning, as he walked into the locker room, two of his colleagues abruptly stopped talking, their faces flush with discomfort. James tried to brush it off, but the nagging feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. Later that day, he caught snippets of a conversation about things not being the way they should be around here. Though no names were mentioned, James felt the weight of their implication. That evening, As the firehouse settled into its usual quiet rhythm, James sought out Michael. He found him in the equipment room, meticulously inspecting a hose. The sight of Michael's strong hands working with such precision usually filled James with admiration, but tonight his stomach churned with unease. "Michael," James began, his voice quieter than he intended, "have you noticed anything strange lately with the others?" Michael glanced up, his dark eyes meeting James's. "What do you mean?" James hesitated, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. "I think they're talking about us, or at least suspecting something." Michael set the hose down and crossed the room, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. "It does matter," James countered, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "If they figure it out, we could lose everything. Our jobs, our reputations." Michael placed a hand on James's shoulder, his touch grounding him. "We've faced worse, James. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Despite Michael's reassurance, James couldn't shake his anxiety. He felt like a man walking a tightrope, knowing one wrong move could send him plunging into the abyss. The firehouse, once his sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield, and the weight of their secret was becoming harder to bear. The fire alarm echoed through the firehouse, a sharp, shrill sound that tore through the night like a dagger. James and Michael sprang into action, their movements automatic despite the weight of exhaustion from an already taxing week. Reports of a raging fire at the city's largest shopping mall crackled over the radio, detailing the scale of the catastrophe. Lives were at stake, hundreds of them. The ride to the scene was tense. James sat across from Michael in the truck, their eyes meeting briefly. James wanted to say something, anything, but the urgency of the moment stole his voice. Michael, as always, looked calm, but James could see the flicker of worry in his dark eyes. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. Flames consumed the structure, roaring with an almost sentient fury. Civilians screamed and scattered, some clutching loved ones while others ran for safety. James and Michael leapt from the truck, joining their team as they donned their masks and prepared for the dangerous rescue ahead. Inside, the heat was unbearable, a suffocating wave that clung to their skin even through their protective gear. James and Michael moved as a unit, their unspoken connection guiding them through the smoke-filled corridors. They found a group of trapped shoppers near the food court, leading them to safety despite the growing instability of the building. "Stay close!" Michael shouted over the cacophony of collapsing debris and roaring flames. His voice, though muffled by his mask, carried a steadiness that bolstered James's courage. As they pressed deeper into the mall, the structure groaned ominously. James's instincts screamed at him to retreat, but they had received reports of more people trapped near the east wing. He and Michael pushed forward, their determination outweighing their fear. They found a young girl huddled in a corner, clutching a teddy bear. Michael scooped her up with the gentleness of a father, his reassuring words muffled but still effective. James led the way back toward the exit, but as they reached the central atrium, a deafening crack split the air. James turned just in time to see the ceiling above them collapse. The force of the debris knocked James to the ground, his vision blurring as pain radiated through his body. When he opened his eyes, Michael was gone. The days after the shopping mall fire were a blur for James. The once familiar routines of the firehouse felt hollow, each corner a reminder of Michael's absence. His fellow firefighters offered condolences, but James could see the pity in their eyes. They had no idea the depth of his loss, nor could he tell them. What he and Michael had shared was a love forged in secrecy, and now it felt as though the weight of that secret might crush him. James had been there when they recovered Michael's body from the rubble. He'd insisted on being part of the crew that went back after the flames were finally extinguished. He remembered the sickening dread as they dug through the debris and the gut-wrenching moment when they found him, still clutching the helmet of the little girl he'd rescued. Michael had always put others first, even at the cost of his own life. The funeral was a somber affair, with rows of firefighters standing at attention, their uniforms pristine as bagpipes played a mournful tune. James stood at the back, clutching the silver ring Michael had given him. It was the only piece of their love he could openly hold on to. His hands trembled as the casket was lowered into the ground, and he clenched his jaw to keep from crying out. After the ceremony, James returned to his apartment, now unbearably silent. The walls seemed to close in on him, the memories of Michael flooding his mind. He sat on the edge of his bed, holding Michael's helmet, the smell of smoke and ash still clinging to it. His fingers traced the worn edges of the metal, his vision blurring with tears. "Why did you have to be so damn selfless?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why couldn't you just stay?" The weeks turned into months, and James found himself spiraling. He returned to the firehouse, but it wasn't the same. Every alarm, every call, every fire reminded him of Michael. He would catch himself looking over his shoulder, expecting to see Michael standing there, flashing that reassuring smile. But he never was. James began writing letters to Michael, pouring out the words he could never say out loud. The pages filled with memories, regrets, and confessions of love. He kept them in a small box, tucked away where no one could find them. It became his way of keeping Michael close, even as the world moved on. One night, unable to sleep, James returned to the firehouse. The equipment room was empty, the familiar hum of the machines a stark contrast to the silence in his heart. He sat on the floor, surrounded by the tools of their trade, and allowed himself to grieve. The tears came slowly at first, then in waves, each one heavier than the last. "I miss you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Every day I miss you." The weight of Michael's loss was unbearable, but James knew he couldn't let his memory fade. Michael had lived his life with purpose, with courage, and with love. James vowed to honor that legacy, even if it meant carrying the pain with him forever. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the small nursing home nestled at the edge of town. James Morgan sat in his favorite armchair by the window, the warm light illuminating the lines etched into his weathered face. His once vibrant red hair had turned a snowy white, but his green eyes still held a spark of the fiery determination that had defined his younger years. On the table beside him lay an old photograph and a small silver ring, the two treasures that connected him to a past he could never let go. The photo was worn and faded, but the image of Michael Carter remained clear. It showed Michael sitting on a wooden dock, his fishing pole in hand, the lake shimmering behind him. He was laughing, his dark eyes alight with joy, his beard framing a smile that had once made James's heart race. James's fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the photo, tracing the outline of Michael's face. "Michael," James whispered, his voice low but steady. "It's been so many years, but it feels like yesterday." His gaze shifted to the silver ring resting on the table, its surface dulled by decades of wear, but no less precious. It was the ring Michael had given him on a quiet night under the stars, a promise of love and commitment in a world that would never understand them. James had never taken it off, even after Michael's death. To him, it wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a part of Michael, a symbol of the bond they had shared. As the memories flooded back, James leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He let himself drift into the past, to a time when he and Michael had been young and fearless, their love burning brightly despite the shadows of secrecy that surrounded them. The first memory that surfaced was of the firehouse where their story had begun. James could still picture Michael walking through the doors for the first time, his broad shoulders filling out his uniform, his dark hair neatly combed, and his brown eyes scanning the room with quiet confidence. James had been captivated from the start, though he hadn't fully understood why. Their friendship had grown quickly, each shared meal, each late-night conversation bringing them closer. James remembered the stolen glances, the accidental touches that lingered just a moment too long, the unspoken connection that neither of them dared to name. It had been a love that defied words, a fire that burned quietly but fiercely in their hearts. James smiled faintly, recalling the night Michael had given him the ring. They had been sitting on the firehouse roof, the city lights stretching out before them like a sea of stars. Michael had been unusually quiet, his usual steady demeanor tinged with nervousness. "I've been thinking," Michael had said, his voice hesitant, "about us, about what this means." James had looked at him, his heart pounding. And Michael had reached into his pocket, pulling out the silver ring. "I don't know what the future holds, James, but I know. I want you in it. This is all I can offer you right now. A promise that no matter what happens, you're the only one for me." James had been too overwhelmed to speak. He had simply nodded, letting Michael slip the ring onto his finger. It had been a quiet, private moment, but it had meant more to James than any grand declaration ever could. James's thoughts drifted to the fire that had changed everything. The shopping mall inferno was still vivid in his mind. The heat, the smoke, the chaos. He remembered the moment the ceiling had collapsed, separating him from Michael. The desperate cries, the frantic digging through the rubble, the crushing realization that he hadn't been able to save him. The pain of that loss still lingered, a deep ache that time had never been able to heal. But even in his grief, James had found ways to keep Michael's memory alive. He had written letters to him, pouring out his thoughts and feelings onto the pages. He had kept the ring as a constant reminder of their love, and he had lived his life in a way that he hoped would make Michael proud. Now, as the sun sank lower in the sky, James opened his eyes and reached for the box of letters on the table. He pulled out the one he had written shortly after Michael's death. The words scrawled in a shaky hand but filled with raw emotion. "Michael," he read aloud, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I don't know how to do this without you. Every day feels like a battle, and every night is colder without you by my side. But I promise I'll keep going. I'll live the life we dreamed of, even if it's without you." He set the letter down, his eyes misty. "I've done my best, Michael," he murmured. "I've tried to make you proud." James leaned back in his chair, the photograph and ring still in his hands. He closed his eyes again, his breathing slowing as he let himself imagine Michael standing before him, his dark eyes warm and his smile as radiant as ever. In his mind, James spoke the words he had never been able to say aloud. I loved you, Michael. I still do. And I always will. As the room grew quieter, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew his time was near, but he wasn't afraid. The thought of being reunited with Michael filled him with a quiet joy. The last rays of sunlight bathed the room in a golden glow as James's breathing grew shallow. He clutched the photograph and ring to his chest, a faint smile on his lips. And as the final breath left his body, James Morgan found himself standing in a place of light and warmth, where Michael was waiting for him, his arms open and his smile as bright as the day they had met. The story of James and Michael is not just about love. It's about courage, sacrifice, and the strength of a connection that transcends time. In a world where their love had to be hidden, they found a way to nurture something pure and true, even amid fear and adversity. Their relationship reminds us that love, in its essence, is stronger than any obstacle, more enduring than any tragedy, and its impact lingers long after those who lived it are gone. James teaches us that grief doesn't erase love, it strengthens it, turning it into a legacy that guides us forever. And Michael, with his bravery and kindness, shows us that living with purpose, even in silence, is an act of defiance in a world not yet ready to accept all forms of love. In the end, their love wasn't extinguished by the flames of tragedy. It burned on as an eternal flame of hope. Hey, what did you think about today's gay story? The emotional journey of James and Michael was sent in by one of our followers, and it's a true celebration of the power of love in the face of challenges. Now tell me, what score or square would you give this story today? From 1 to 10. Leave your rating in the comments because your opinion matters to us. And if you have an emotional, impactful, or twist-filled story to share, we want to hear it. Drop your email in the comments, and our team will reach out to transform your story into a video here on the channel. We're eagerly waiting for your story. See you in the next video.